Hello, good morning, and welcome to this session. In this session, let us see what is working capital and the factors which decides the volume of working capital. So the working capital is the volume of capital required for a business to run its day-to-day business. Such as the company may need to pay salaries, to meet short-term liabilities, and to meet day-to-day expenses. So the volume of capital which is required by the company for these expenses is called as working capital. Now let us see the factors which decides the volume of working capital. One is nature of business. Generally, a trading company which is involved in trading business may require low volume of capital because they are not involved in any productive activity. Then there is no need to keep large volume of stocks and etc. In the case of manufacturing company, it requires huge amount of capital since it is in the process of converting raw material into finished goods. So businesses involved in trading may not require huge amount of capital, whereas manufacturing company will need to keep huge amount of working capital. Scale of operations is another thing which decides the volume of capital. Generally, companies involved in large scale operation need to keep more data, more inventory, and hence the working capital will also be more. Companies which operate in a small scale will be having to keep a small volume of capital. Then business cycle is also one of the factors which decides the factor. You cannot expect stable and uniform demand for product all over the year. So generally there are two kinds of periods. One is boom and another one is depression period. In boom period, you can expect a large volume of business and hence you have to keep more stock, more data and more production. Therefore, in boom period, generally the requirement for working capital will be more. On the other hand, in depression period, there will be less sales, less stock and fewer depots. Therefore, in depression period, the requirement for capital will be less. Seasonal factors also is one of the factor which decides the volume of working capital required. There are some goods which may be in seasonal demand. So during such seasons, you have to maintain large volume of capital, working capital to meet the requirements. During off seasons, on the other hand, only less capital will be required. Technology and production cycle. This is another factor which decides the volume of capital. Generally, in a labor-intensive units, the volume of working capital required will be more. Since the payment of salary requires more amount, so in the labor-intensive industries, the capital requirement, that is fixed capital requirements will be less, whereas working capital requirement will be more. On the other hand, in a capital-intensive industry, they have to invest huge amount of capital in machineries and fixed assets. On the other hand, since it is machinized, the working capital requirement will be less. So in a capital intensive industry, working capital requirement will be less. On the other hand, in a labor intensive industry, the requirement for working capital will be more. Liberal credit policy is a policy in which we are liberal in collecting the debts from the debtors. So when you follow liberal credit policy, the volume of debt outstanding will be more. Therefore, the working capital will also be more. On the other hand, strict policy will result in requirement of low working capital. Credit availed is the method which we avail credit from the creditors. So when credit availed from the suppliers is more, the requirement for working capital will also be less. Operating efficiency is the efficiency of work done, that is converting of raw materials into cash in cycle is called as operating efficiency. When the operating efficiency is more, that is the time taken to convert materials into cash production, sales and cash is less, the volume of working capital required will be less. On the other hand, if it is a lengthy process, if there is no operating efficiency, and the requirement of capital will be also more. Availability of raw materials, this is also another factor. Generally, there are all the goods will not be available throughout the year. So there are some materials which will be available only during a particular season. So in such situation, we have to dump materials. We have to invest large amount of capital in raw materials. Therefore, if materials supply is available throughout the year, working capital requirement will be less. If there is a scarcity or rough supply of materials, then you have to invest a huge amount of capital in raw materials. Therefore, the availability of materials will also one of the factor which decides the working capital requirement. Competition. So when there is huge competition in the market, then you have to naturally follow liberal credit policy. Following liberal credit policy will require large amount of capital. So where there is less competition, that leads to monopoly, and there you can follow strict credit policy, and thereby the requirement of working capital will be less. Thank you.